I've worked in enterprise architecture and I'd like to share some thoughts about it. Enterprise architecture, or EA, can be a very important practice, especially for any organization that's reaching sufficient size and complexity and are going through change. However, enterprise architecture, or EA, is not always well understood. So for it to be successful, it must be done right, both from the top down, meaning it has support from the top of the organization, as well as from the bottom up, meaning it's executed correctly. And what I'm going to talk about is more of the bottom up, executing it with the right tools and making it simple. So let's just zoom out and ask, what is architecture? So you could say that architecture is planning how the parts fit together holistically to achieve the goals. And that could be building a structure of any kind, not just a house, but you'll see these blueprints and diagrams here. And these models are all high level and generic or abstract. For example, in the model of the car, you guys say that the tire is connected to the axle. You do not say the tire is Goodyear model X33. And in the human physiology diagrams, you have different systems or layers, skeletal, respiratory, etc., which could be important to understand how those layers interact. So just like the human body, an enterprise organization has layers, and it's a complex system. So most enterprise architecture practices use BDAT, or these layers of business, data, application, and technology. And most EA frameworks or methodologies attempt to communicate around these layers. For example, an older model, Zachman, came up with a different way to model or diagram an aspect or dimension of each layer. And TOGAF, one of the more commonly used frameworks today, is not for diagramming, but it does talk about how to go through these layers to create an architecture. More specifically, a target architecture that's driven by business goals or strategies. And any of these methodologies either come with or can be paired with some kind of modeling language to capture this information. An EA repository would be where you store the information that you capture for any topic of the whole enterprise architecture. For example, you could apply a collection of existing standards like BPMN, UML in the top left here to any of the discussions you have around architecture. Or you could adopt some proprietary modeling language like the bottom left, ARIS, EPC is one example. Or on the right hand side here, Archimate was created by the same group that created TOGAF, and that's another model that adopts the layers. And it breaks out those layers into elements and relations that you would create diagrams for in your repository. So as you might be thinking, there's a real problem here. There's a lot of complexity. So which EA team do you think would be more effective? On the left, you have the EA wizard, the architect, the one who understands these diagramming models and maintains them. But let's be realistic. Most people are not going to be able to understand 60 symbols and relations on a day-to-day basis. From human psychology, there's a concept called the magic number, which means your short-term memory of most people can really only hold 5 to 7 items in your head at one time. This is really important for concepts like usability and user interfaces, but also for something like a modeling language. If you want that modeling language to be understood and be able to be shared and collaborative. And let's also be realistic that the person on the left does not exist. EA is dependent upon collaboration and facilitating amongst SMEs, subject matter experts, your solution architects, or those who are closer to the work. So you need to have a practice that's a federated EA that relies upon the knowledge and the brains and the talent of those people spread through your organization. So it's vitally important that you have a simple way to represent and communicate enterprise architecture for it to be successful. So here's my suggestion. Look for something that fits that magic number. And you can boil EA down, whether it's Archimate or UML and other things, and combine and take the best elements of those modeling languages. So on the left, you have what I consider one of the best ways and most easy to understand models out there, a UML use case diagram. The square things are structures and the round things are actions. That's very easy visually to understand, and it also can be very descriptive. Now, Archimate on the right is probably used by a lot of EA organizations today, but like I said, it has 58 elements and 12 relations. This is a snapshot of what inspired Archimate. It was breaking out the layers, the EA layers, but also it was UML inspired. If you look at Archimate, it broke down behaviors and structures just like UML did. So I believe a very good EA modeling language that approaches that magic number should combine these things for your own language that simplifies it. And here's a simple example. You have one element for each layer, either a behavior or structure if needed, and you can drastically reduce the number of elements, and it can still be very descriptive. So for example, the business layer, which is what people do, is broken down into structures and actions, and that would be a role, would be a person or job title, and that performs a process, which you could call an action. And applications are all structures, they're things which perform functions, and you can describe those things in those two layers of structures and behaviors. Capability would be your business capability hierarchy for your organization. And you can think of that as like a skeleton that the other elements are going to map to, and it's going to allow you to find things mapped by capabilities. And goals would describe things that your organization wants to do. And people will use different terms, objectives or pillars or other words, but drive it towards just one concept, goals. And deliverables would be mapped to the work that's happening or the efforts that's happening. And that could be agile epics or projects or anything else, but map those things to deliverables to track where your target architectures are being delivered, and also mapping that to what changes need to happen to achieve your target architecture and to achieve your goals. So to implement this simpler EA model, you could create stacks of Visios and diagrams, but I believe a much better tool and one tool to rely on to capture all your information would be a knowledge graph with using a graph database as a backend. So with a graph database, you can create your own schema and style guide of types and relationships. There are ways that you can visualize them, and when you query them, only show parts of them. So this is a very interesting way to get away from some of the complex diagramming languages out there and build your own EA repository using your own schema. And you could link the elements in your knowledge graph to the source system or the real element. For example, deliverable could link to a project or an agile effort, and application could link to if you have an application portfolio. So you could customize this as needed. But most importantly, you've gone towards that magic number, and if you approach EA this way, you're going to find that conversations with people outside your core EA team, they're going to intuitively follow the conversations and be more engaged when they can understand what you're building on the screen and communicating with your model. So you're going to avoid one of the pitfalls of EA, which is that EA wizard, that complexity, that's a bottleneck that people don't understand what you're talking about. And it will also improve even the communication within your EA team depending on its size. So that's my recommendation, to fix the bottom-up side of EA, the execution side, and to simplify it. And I hope this helps. Thanks for watching.